In 1944, the Allies invaded Normandy with one idea in mind: to liberate occupied France from Nazi Germany. Behind the famous naval operation was another logistical feat that has remained less well known.
Ce qui importe, c'est le chemin de fer, puisque c'est lui qui va permettre la logistique et qui va permettre de quitter la plage, de quitter les côtes normandes, pour ensuite pouvoir libérer le reste du territoire.
S'il n'y avait pas eu de chemin de fer transporté, l'opération se serait limitée aux plages de Normandie. Le chemin de fer amène la suite.
Trains were at the logistical heart of D-Day and the Allied invasion of France. In the US and Great Britain, new trains were built with special rail battalions created. Millions of tons of manpower and equipment were transported across the Atlantic, then stocked out of sight on the English coasts, in readiness for D-Day.
To back up the initial forces that were sent on D-Day, railway locomotives and railway equipment were sent. Without the railways, winning the war was impossible.
For the Allies, trains were a valuable asset, but also a formidable tool for the enemy. So prior to the landings, the network was taken out of service by bombing stations and strategic installations.
It was part of a long battle in which lots of things were learned. And one of the things that was learnt that, certainly at the time, without the support of railways, you could not make sufficient progress.
Le plus rapide, le plus simple, le plus économique, c'est le train.
Railways are an often forgotten part of the Normandy landings. The whole logistics aspects of the Battle of Normandy is often forgotten.
During Operation Overlord, trains remained an essential element in the Allies' faultless military strategy, the weapon that led to the liberation of France and to victory in the war. Normandy, spring 1944. Germany had its eye on the horizon, looking out towards the United Kingdom. General Erwin Rommel, whom Hitler had entrusted with defending the French coast against an attack that Berlin considered unlikely, was not fooled. He knew something was brewing across the Channel.
Les Allemands savent que les Alliés vont débarquer. Où? Là est toute la question. Et les Allemands ont un service de renseignement qui est absolument lamentable. C'est l'un des gros points faibles de l'armée allemande pendant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. Donc ils se perdent en spéculation et ils pensent que les Alliés vont débarquer dans le Pas-de-Calais parce que c'est là où eux débarqueraient. Ça tient plus de l'intuition que du renseignement militaire.
The intuition of this clever military tactician, nicknamed the Desert Fox after his exploits in North Africa, led him to fear an imminent invasion in Normandy between Cherbourg and Caen. However, the French rail network, essential for a German counterattack, was in a terrible condition. The railway lines were almost entirely in pieces.
Au printemps 1944, le système ferroviaire français est de manière générale en très mauvais état. Les Allemands ont tout exploité. Ils ont utilisé les grues, le matériel de dépannage. Les voies sont mal entretenues, le matériel est mal entretenu, donc le système est en fait à peu près grippé par lui-même.
Rommel knew, as things stood, it would take weeks and weeks to get troops and armored divisions all the way to the Normandy coast in the event of an Allied invasion. This delay could be fatal to the German army.
C'est pour cette raison qu'il va poser des millions de mines, faire construire ce que l'on appelle les asperges de Rommel, qui sont en fait des tétraèdres de barres d'acier qui doivent normalement déchiqueter les péniches qui arrivent sur la plage, construire des bunkers pour des postes de mitrailleuses avec en retrait des postes d'artillerie. Et logiquement, cela doit permettre de cantonner les troupes d'assaut sur la plage et laisser le temps aux unités blindées qui seraient appelées immédiatement pour venir repousser les Alliés avant qu'ils n'aient pris pied sur le continent.
Hitler didn't heed his general's warning, even though summer was near, and with it, better weather. which could be the signal for an imminent invasion. A few days later, in the middle of the English countryside, a highly secret meeting took place which turned out to be decisive. Away from prying ears and eyes, in a small disused station in the south of England, the leader of Free France was summoned by the British Prime Minister on board his private train. For Churchill, the time had come to share the Allies' secret plans to liberate France and its people.
Winston Churchill had his train, which would go around the countryside, and when he was on it, he used it like a mobile 10 Downing Street. It was the nerve centre. Wherever Churchill went, he would meet heads of state there, prime ministers, and all sorts of people. And they say that de Gaulle had to walk down a darkened railway track, all tripping over to find Churchill at the end of it. But it wasn't a happy meeting.
This was the first time, just a few days away from the invasion, that de Gaulle had heard about the details of Operation Overlord.
And of course, General de Gaulle was very angry because he'd been kept in the dark about this operation. He was in Algeria at the time, and he came back to be confronted with this operation, which amazed him in its scale and its size, but also angered him because he hadn't been involved in any of the decisions.
The reality was that the Allied forces had been preparing the invasion of occupied France for years. Ever since the U.S. had entered the war in 1941, Stalin had been urging Roosevelt and Churchill to open a Western front in Europe to help relieve his troops who were fighting the Nazis in the East. They finally met up in December 1943 at the Tehran Conference to hash out a plan to invade France via Normandy, Operation Overlord. American General Dwight Eisenhower was chosen to lead the mission from London. He became the supreme commander of the Allied forces, in charge of carrying out the landings. His recent successes in North Africa and Sicily inspired him to put the train at the heart of the logistics of Overlord.
Le débarquement des Alliés en France s'appuie sur la marine et sur l'aviation. Ça, tout le monde le connaît. Mais juste après avoir quitté la plage, ce qui importe, c'est le chemin de fer, puisque c'est lui qui va permettre la logistique et qui va permettre de quitter la plage, de quitter les côtes normandes, pour ensuite pouvoir libérer le reste du territoire. Sans le chemin de fer, la libération du territoire aurait été beaucoup plus compliquée.
L'air, l'aviation, la mer, les bateaux, ce n'est pas la terre. Or, les guerres, c'est la terre. Ça se fait sur terre. Donc forcément, il faut un transporteur de masse. Le chemin de fer transporte à peu près 50 fois ce que transporte l'aviation. Donc forcément, le chemin de fer est mis à contribution.
From the outset of Operation Overlord, railways were put at the heart of the logistics of the Normandy invasion. But the Allies knew that they couldn't rely on British equipment, which was worn out after 3 years of war, and even less so on equipment they would find in Normandy, since the occupying forces had run it into the ground, and railway saboteurs had done the rest.
Les Américains se rendent compte très tôt qu'ils vont devoir aller combattre en Europe et qu'ils vont devoir y aller avec des gros moyens. Donc une partie de ça, c'est constituer ces moyens, des chars, des jeeps, du matériel qu'il va falloir faire construire et débarquer, mais il va falloir aussi le transporter. Et donc ils savent que la clé d'une opération militaire réussie, elle est fortement liée à la logistique. Et pour ça, il va falloir des moyens pour transporter ces matériels. Et ce ne sera pas des moyens routiers. Ils vont se rendre compte qu'il va falloir utiliser le chemin de fer, soit le chemin de fer existant, soit l'épauler, le reconstruire, le compléter par du matériel qu'ils vont amener.
When the U.S. entered the war in 1941, during an industrial boom, they could boast about having one of the largest and best-running railway systems in the world. They had more than 420,000 kilometers of rail tracks.
Le chemin de fer américain dans les années 40 est splendide. Il y a des locomotives très lourdes, puissantes, qui sont copiées, y compris par les soviétiques, donc dans le monde entier. Non, le chemin de fer américain est extrêmement performant, mais ce qu'il y a d'encore plus performant, c'est l'industrie américaine. On ne peut pas trouver en Europe des industries capables de réunir d'un seul coup 10 000 ou 100 000 ouvriers pour se mettre à fabriquer quelque chose.
Only the industrial might of the U.S. could meet the needs of the Allies to wage war on the European continent. Planning for the American Army's railway strategy was in the hands of a specially created unit, the MRS, the Military Railway Service.
Le Military Railway Service, c'est une unité constituée par les Américains parce qu'ils se rendent compte qu'ils vont avoir un vrai besoin du service ferroviaire pour épauler le débarquement. Et donc on crée cette unité qui sera ensuite rattachée au génie, au sein de laquelle on a des bataillons qui sont des ROB, les Railway Operating Battalion, qui sont des bataillons ferroviaires. Et donc, au sein du MRS, on a différentes unités, des unités opérationnelles, des unités de support, avec des unités qui vont construire des voies, des ateliers qui vont réparer les matériels, qui exploitent les unités opérationnelles.
To carry out Operation Overlord successfully, the MRS created 10 new divisions, the Railway Grand Division, whose mission was to serve in Europe. Each division numbered between 3,000 and 6,000 men and women.
Ils sont en uniforme militaire, mais ils ont pour la plupart été commissionnés, c'est-à-dire rendus militaires, très peu de temps avant de rentrer sur le théâtre d'action en Europe, parce que pour la plupart, ce sont des cheminots aux États-Unis. Donc ils viennent des grandes compagnies de chemin de fer, ils ont un vrai savoir-faire ferroviaire, en tant que ce sont des cheminots, et ils sont devenus soldats par la force des choses. Donc on les appelle souvent des cheminots-soldats, parce que à l'origine, ce sont bien des cheminots.
The first mission for the MRS was to ascertain how much equipment the American Army needed.
Pour les Américains, il est clair qu'il va falloir inonder l'Europe avec une tête de pont qui est en Angleterre pour ensuite débarquer en Normandie et aller partir vers l'Allemagne, mais partir loin, vers l'Italie, vers les Balkans. Et pour ça, pour eux, c'est des quantités phénoménales de matériel qui sont nécessaires. C'est des milliers et des milliers de wagons, des milliers de locomotives, des dizaines de milliers d'hommes.
In 1942 and 43, American factories were completely mobilized to take part in the war effort, which were already manufacturing locomotives for civilian use, converted their production facilities to comply with the Army's needs. The question remained as to the most suitable equipment for this extraordinary logistical operation, because the European rail network had its own specifications. Every little detail could make a difference.
Dès septembre 1942, les Américains envoient une délégation d'ingénieurs américains spécialisés dans les chemins de fer qui vont travailler sur ce qu'ils vont devoir mettre en place en Europe. Évidemment, il y a des choses qui sont très différentes avec ce qu'ils connaissent aux États-Unis, donc il faut qu'ils s'imprègnent de la culture européenne et il faut qu'ils voient comment ils vont adapter leur industrie et leur cahier des charges pour que ça fonctionne une fois qu'ils seront en Europe.
They had to be suitable for the French gauge, which is slightly smaller than the American gauge. American engines are famously larger. They operate on the same 4 foot 8.5, but they are wider and higher. And so the locomotives that they brought over had to be fit into the French tunnels and embankments and bridges and stations and whatever.
To advance through Normandy, tracks, carriages, and above all, locomotives were needed, all fit for purpose.
Comme pour les véhicules routiers, où ils ont défini quelques programmes très différenciés, avec des Jeeps en véhicules légers, des Dodge en véhicules moyens et des GMC pour les camions, on va faire la même chose pour le matériel ferroviaire, avec des locomotives à vapeur de 2 catégories, des petites et des grosses, des petites locomotives 3 essieux pour faire les manœuvres, des plus grosses locomotives polyvalentes pour tirer les trains en ligne. Et puis, ils font aussi appel à des locomotives diesel pour des usages spécifiques. C'est encore une technologie récente à l'époque, puisqu'on a essentiellement des locomotives à vapeur.
2 steam locomotives labeled USATC, Transportation Corps, were created to support the Allies during Operation Overlord. The S-100 designed for maintenance, and the S-160 for long journeys.
Il faut des machines qui soient extrêmement simples et extrêmement robustes, et qui soient capables d'être conduites par, je vais dire, n'importe qui. Donc il faut des machines qui sont à simple expansion, c'est-à-dire que la vapeur ne sert qu'une seule fois. Ces machines à 5 expansions vont avoir toutes les pièces mécaniques qui vont être à l'extérieur du châssis pour pouvoir être facilement réparables. Les pistons sont même interchangeables entre droite et gauche, ce qui permet facilement de réparer. On n'a pas besoin d'avoir la pièce. Une pièce générique permet de réparer quel que soit le côté accidenté. Ces machines, par contre, revers de la médaille, vont consommer énormément de combustible, mais en échange d'une simplicité d'utilisation et d'une fiabilité beaucoup plus grande.
Among the 382 American S-100s that were shipped to Europe, 77 of them ran for the SNCF under the code name 030 TU. They were light, had 3 axles in a 030 arrangement, and could reach speeds of 50 kilometers an hour. They were all manufactured within several months in the factories of H.K. Porter, Vulcan, or the Davenport Locomotive Works.
On reprend une technologie qui existait déjà pendant la Première Guerre mondiale et on reprend surtout une technologie éprouvée qui permet de rouler partout avec des pièces standardisées. On va pouvoir les réparer facilement, on va pouvoir les mettre en chauffe facilement et on va pouvoir les conduire facilement. C'est pas la locomotive la plus puissante, c'est pas la locomotive la plus rapide, mais elle répond bien à son besoin dans une période de guerre.
The American engineers foresaw every situation and left no stone unturned, even incorporating each national specification into the plans for the new locomotives.
Le frein, notamment, n'est pas du tout le même entre l'Angleterre et la France. On utilise en France un frein à air comprimé, c'est-à-dire qu'il faut une pompe qui envoie de l'air comprimé pour libérer les freins, alors qu'au Royaume-Uni, on utilise un frein à vide. C'est un système qui marche à peu près de la même façon, c'est de l'air qui serre les freins, sauf que d'un côté, en France, c'est de l'air comprimé, et au Royaume-Uni, c'est une mise à vide, on aspire l'air.
The 2 single continuous braking systems enabled convoys to come to a halt instantaneously, in contrast to the previous system where brake guards operated the brakes manually, carriage by carriage.
Donc, pour envoyer des locomotives qui vont d'abord servir au Royaume-Uni puis en Europe, on va être obligé d'avoir les 2 systèmes. Donc ça complique le fonctionnement, ça complique la construction de ces trains puisqu'il nous faut des locomotives avec le système européen continental et le système à vide à l'anglaise.
To be pulled by these locomotives, carriages made specifically for the Normandy invasion were necessary.
Ce sont des wagons qui sont aussi prévus pour être exploités très peu de temps. Donc on sait qu'ils ne seront pas très solides, qu'ils ne dureront pas des dizaines d'années, contrairement à ce qu'on aime faire dans le chemin de fer d'habitude. Là, ce sont des wagons qu'on veut monter rapidement, utiliser facilement, quitte à les détruire après-guerre.
The MRS engineers had accomplished their mission. The S-100 and S-160 locomotives left their factories, and the American troops got ready. The next step was to cross the Atlantic to the UK and wait for D-Day, whose exact date was still secret. Between April 1942 and April 1944, around 1,500,000 American soldiers and nearly 5 million tons of equipment, including hundreds of locomotives and carriages, were shipped across the ocean. The code name was Operation Bolero. Transporting rail equipment by ship was long and perilous, and German submarines, the U-boats, caused havoc. Convoys had to be escorted by heavily armed battleships, equipped with high-class radars. Soldiers were packed in tightly to make as much room as possible for the equipment. The daily supplies for a single soldier had been multiplied by 4 since the First World War, not to mention the rolling stock and all the accompanying equipment needed to rebuild the French railways.
On a des locomotives en kit, des wagons en kit par milliers destinés à la France. Et on a même de la signalisation, on a même des voies, des rails, enfin, etc. Ils transportent à travers l'Atlantique ce qu'on pourrait appeler tout un mécano ferroviaire. Je dirais, c'est un réseau de modélistes ferroviaires, mais en grandeur réelle.
Donc ces wagons, on va les transporter dans des bateaux avec l'objectif d'en mettre le plus possible pour maximiser les transports maritimes. Donc on va les acheminer en kit et puis on va les construire sur le sol anglais pour ensuite les débarquer en Europe. Ou on va prendre des locomotives qu'on va amener quasiment prêtes à l'emploi et on va les protéger pour le transport. On va les protéger par exemple avec des planches au niveau de la cabine pour pas que les vitres soient cassées. On met juste quelques planches. Et bien, ça a même été pensé pour utiliser ces planches pour mettre en chauffe la locomotive. Donc c'est une vraie réflexion logistique qui a été prise très en amont.
Thousands of American soldiers of the MRS arrived in towns and villages in England and Scotland, disrupting normal life. Cooperation on the railways, however, wasn't always easy.
Comme on expédie ces matériels des semaines, voire des mois à l'avance, on ne peut pas laisser les personnels sans utilisation. Il ne faut pas qu'ils se tournent les pouces. Donc on leur demande de s'entraîner, de rouler, voire de former des populations locales, des Anglais qui vont être incorporés dans les bataillons, sauf que ça se fait parfois en force. C'est-à-dire que c'est les Américains qui veulent imposer leur système et qui n'écoutent pas les règles du vieux continent qui étaient en vigueur jusqu'alors.
It was a cooperative effort, and there was bound to be some friction between the different nationalities, but there was also a lot of respect. And one thing about railway workers is that they are railway workers first, and American and British second, and so they were doing the same job, maybe with different technologies and kind of slightly different customs and practices, but essentially they were railway workers.
At the beginning of 1944, the preparation for Operation Overlord entered a new phase. All the equipment necessary for invading France needed to be moved as discreetly as possible to the south of England from where the troops would be leaving.
Tens of thousands of trains were sent to the ports, at least tens of thousands. And it was, as I say, it was an extraordinary operation.
To move supplies over to Normandy, there was a whole chain along which the supplies would move. And the railways generally were the starting point for that.
Helped by the Railways Executive Committee, the Allies gradually transported troops and equipment to the South Coast. In the 2 months leading up to D-Day, 25,000 special convoys were chartered.
So gradually they were brought down to the south coast, and some of them would have moved by road, but in many cases they were moved by rail, and quite often they'd be moved quite long distances. Not just people on foot, not just troops on foot, but also vehicles like the Sherman. If you're moving a tank like this the whole length of the country, it was much better to move it on a train rather than driving a long distance that would cause wear and tear to all the mechanisms, the tracks, the engine, etc. It would keep the vehicle fresh for when it was needed in Normandy.
They had to store the equipment, preferably on rails, because otherwise it would take a lot of hassle to get it onto the rails. They had to then ensure they could get it to the ports quickly, and the roads were just impossible.
The UK transport system was working overtime. Every day, tons of equipment, weapons, and supplies were moved across the country for the troops who were preparing for D-Day.
So these freight trains were known as the tarpaulin armada. The tarpaulin is a piece of material that you lay over something to stop it blowing away. So a tarpaulin is a large piece of material that you would have put over the top of a truck so you couldn't see what was inside. So it was a material that was roped held on with ropes onto a railway truck so you couldn't see what was inside.
Some of the rolling stock intended for the Normandy landings was being used in Britain, where they were already short of nearly 400 locomotives and 2,000 carriages to ensure sufficient transport for the Allies. To keep up with the pace, the UK provided heavy freight locomotives, which had been running since the 1930s, the well-known 8F class.
So this is a Stania 8F heavy freight locomotive. It was the standard for the London Midland Scottish Railway, one of the big four companies. But at the outbreak of the war, 1939, it became adopted by the Army and the Ministry of Supply as the standard freight locomotive for construction for wartime use. Well, you'll see the locomotive has smallish driving wheels, cylinders there, the piston driving via the rods on the wheels. Now, the locomotive, being a standard of the 1930s, used many large components of scarce materials, copper, brass, and things like that for axle boxes, fireboxes, all copper in the boiler. So it was difficult to resource that material, and so a more modern design was then adopted that used far fewer of these scarce materials.
Coupled with these sturdy locomotives were flatback carriages. They were the only type capable of transporting the parts needed to build ships and tanks. They were manufactured in different factories up and down the country.
The whole industry was not concentrated in a single site, so you would manufacture components and they were brought together. So both for tanks and aircraft, there was a huge movement of materials, so that, which the railway played an absolutely critical role.
From 1943, the British War Department started operating the austerity locomotives, fresh out of the factories. They were small wartime locomotives, very similar to their American counterparts. Light, sturdy, cheap, and efficient. Once the equipment had reached the south of the country, the Allies were faced with a new challenge: how to hide all these troops and rolling stock from the German intelligence service, who were flying over the coast looking for clues. So several huge depots were constructed in Newport, Treforest, Moreton-on-Lug, Cadoxton, and Tidworth. For many long weeks, troops were stationed in specially organized areas, hastily set up in secret, and above all, out of sight.
The places they were going to were generally camps hidden away in the woods. So they were temporary camps generally. Most of the people would have been just in tents, so it was not like a military barracks or anything like that. And they're kept there for, in many cases, for several weeks or even more than a month, waiting until all the other troops were gathered in the area, ready for D-Day.
There was the most fantastic collection of American equipment that was being stored in all sorts of places across southern England. You know, in addition to 1,000 locomotives, there was something like 10 times that amount of wagons. There were carriages for people, and even things like signaling equipment. And all this had to be stored, often with some sort of disguise, because they couldn't be targets for the Luftwaffe.
To deceive the enemy and divert their gaze from the stations and impromptu depots, which had sprung up in the south of England, the Allies even went as far as constructing fake equipment, which they left in plain view for the Luftwaffe pilots to spot.
Imaginez qu'on va pouvoir stocker des centaines et des centaines de locomotives à la queue leu-leu, des milliers de wagons sur des triages réquisitionnés où, vu du ciel, on voit bien que les wagons sont les uns derrière les autres et ils ne bougent pas. Ça a dû être vraiment une gageure pour que les Allemands ne se rendent pas compte que ça allait leur tomber dessus quelques semaines plus tard.
It was a great secret to hold, and of course it changed their lives. And they were preparing for, you know, one of the great invasions of military history ever.
The Allies' railway arsenal was now complete. But before embarking for the Normandy coast, the Allies had a last detail to fix. A detail that could set the German counteroffensive back weeks once the invasion had taken place. Eisenhower was adamant. The major transport routes of France had to be bombed, and in priority, the railways. The strategy of the Supreme Chief of the Allied forces was summed up in 2 words: transportation plan, a tailor-made bombing program to destroy the effectiveness of the French rail network.
L'objectif, c'est vraiment de frapper les trains pour que les Allemands ne puissent pas monter de contre-offensive blindée, pour qu'ils ne puissent pas amener leurs blindés trop rapidement vers la tête de pont. C'est vraiment l'objectif du Transportation Plan.
The man behind the transportation plan was Solly Zuckerman, a civilian with quite an interesting background. He was a British university researcher, specialized in the anatomy of primates, and after the aggressive German Blitz of London in 1940, he became interested in the science of bombing. Zuckerman was commissioned by Eisenhower, who had been traumatized by his recent failures in Italy and North Africa, to head the transportation plan. And he put the train at the heart of the plan.
Ces débarquements ont été marqués, surtout en Italie, par des réactions allemandes très vigoureuses. C'est-à-dire, à peine les Alliés débarquaient, les Allemands étaient capables de monter des contre-offensives blindées très puissantes. Et Eisenhower a été en particulier très marqué par des scènes de chaos. Et pour Overlord, il veut à tout prix éviter ça. Et c'est ce qu'il dit à ses planificateurs, il dit « Je vais être tranquille pour une semaine ».
Since the Germans would need these trains to transport their armored divisions, then it was vital to prevent these trains running all the way to Normandy.
Le cœur du système ferroviaire, ce sont les grandes gares. Et dans le cœur de ce cœur, il y a les dépôts de locomotives. Les dépôts de locomotives et les hangars de maintenance des locomotives, pour lui, c'est le cœur du réseau. Et donc c'est en visant ces cibles particulières dans les gares qu'il pense qu'il n'y aura plus de maintenance possible pour les locomotives, qu'elles ne pourront plus être utilisées. Elles vont engorger elles-mêmes le trafic, qui, à défaut d'être détruit, sera paralysé.
Allied bombers started attacking French railways in spring 1944. The first step was to bomb the bridges on the Seine River, to instill doubt in the enemy's mind.
Si on attaque les ponts sur la Seine, ça peut être pour débarquer en Normandie, mais aussi dans le Pas-de-Calais. Et ce n'est que beaucoup plus tard qu'on va attaquer les ponts sur la Loire. Et ensuite, à la fin du mois de mai, on va passer à l'attaque directe des locomotives. Donc là, on va continuer à attaquer les gares, mais aussi directement les trains.
And of course, if we bomb Normandy too much, the Germans would think, why are you concentrating on Normandy? So we had to bomb elsewhere. So for every bomb we dropped on Normandy, we dropped 3 somewhere else, in Belgium or in northern France. And again, targeting the railways and the installations to prevent the Germans from bringing reinforcements into the Normandy battle zone.
In finally choosing to attack the trains, the Allies knew that bombing would cause major civilian casualties. Little by little, the transportation plan grew unpopular among the coalition. Winston Churchill, in particular, was worried, and this put the plan into doubt.
Yes, I mean, Churchill was very, very concerned that in liberating France, we would cause massive destruction, both to French territory and its infrastructure, but also to the French people themselves. And there's an argument about whether we bombed the transportation plan, it was called, bombing traffic nodes, and particularly railway stations and crossings in Normandy, or the petroleum plan, which is where you try and stop the Germans feeding their tanks and their trains by hitting oil refineries and things like that. All of it came with terrific risk.
Churchill s'intéresse au plan et il se dit si on tue des Français, on risque de soulever l'opinion publique française alors qu'on va avoir besoin des Français dans ce qui ne s'appelle pas encore la guerre froide, mais dont il devine les prémices. C'est pour ça que lui, il s'oppose au plan.
At the end of April 1944, the transportation plan was temporarily halted. Eisenhower threatened to resign. Behind the scenes, the crisis caused a clash between the leaders of the Allied forces. Churchill appealed to President Roosevelt to intervene. The American president took a few days to make his decision. In a letter dated May 11th, he replied to Churchill, outlining the defense of his general stance. The Allied destruction of stations and trains left painful traces in the memory of the French population. It's estimated that 21,000 civilians died in the transportation plan bombings. The Allies had succeeded, For several years, they'd been preparing the most ambitious logistical operation in history without giving away any details to German intelligence. On the south coast of England, where the invasion was on everyone's minds, the date of D-Day was still unknown.
Everyone knew D-Day was coming, and the more time went by, the more people thought D-Day must be very soon. But most civilians didn't know, despite all these troop movements and all of that, most civilians didn't know that D-Day was coming beforehand.
Some people suspected, but for obvious reasons, it had to be a secret, and people didn't know about it, otherwise it would be given away to the Germans.
At the beginning of June, the invasion was just days away. All the railway equipment was hidden in nearby forests. The headquarters of the MRS moved from London to Southampton, as did Eisenhower's too. It was here, behind the four walls of Southwark House, an ultra-secret location still guarded by soldiers even today, that the final preparations were made. The house remains legendary for heads of state and has been preserved in exactly the same state it was in on D-Day.
So Eisenhower arrives here on the 2nd of June at the battle headquarters of Admiral Ramsey, where the naval operation Neptune is being executed. And the reason why he came here was that this was the very nerve centre for the Overlord invasion. If they couldn't get them onto the beaches via the sea, the operation would fail. And in this room, which was then the library of the house, it was where the secrets were discussed. This was a really secure area, guarded by Marine commandos outside, and you could only come in here if you were in the top team. And here we have the D-Day map, the famous map that was used prior to the invasion of Overlord, and then to plot Operation Neptune, which was the naval forces moving on towards Normandy and the liberation of France.
While more than 1.5 million men and women, among them tens of thousands of railway soldiers, were anxiously waiting for the go-ahead for the most dangerous mission of their lives, General Eisenhower had to decide behind closed doors on the best moment to launch the final phase of Operation Overlord. Count the weather, the tides, and the sea levels. Eisenhower's teams came up with 2 windows. To make the most of the full moon, the troops would have to set out between June 4th and 6th. But the day before the planned invasion, the weather forecast was bad.
This is an example of the charts, the meteorological charts that were being used by Group Captain James Stagg, who was Eisenhower's chief meteorological advisor. And it shows the build-up of D-, so 2.5 days before the landings of the 6th of June. And it shows you how these depressions are moving, which of course was the reason why D-Day was first postponed from the 5th of June and then reset for the 6th of June.
From his library at midnight on June 6th, Eisenhower gave the go-ahead. The first paratroopers were released almost immediately. At 5 p.m., General de Gaulle went on the BBC to confirm the launching of Operation Overlord.
Après tant de combats, de fureur, de douleur, voici venu le choc décisif. Le choc tant espéré. Bien entendu, c'est la bataille de France et c'est la bataille de la France.
L'effort de guerre anglo-américain est une surprise pour les Allemands. Vous savez que les premiers soldats allemands qui aperçoivent le ciel au matin de juin 1944 disent « le ciel est noir d'avions ». Mais ce n'était rien comparé à ce qui les attendait sur la mer. C'était une flotte absolument immense de milliers et de milliers de bateaux qui vont débarquer et qui, en quelques heures, commencent à reconstruire le chemin de fer français pour aller en direction de Paris.
Over the following 87 days, up until the end of August 1944, more than 2 million soldiers landed in France, along with hundreds of locomotives, thousands of carriages, and millions of tons of equipment. In the large ports of Southampton and Portsmouth, the atmosphere was electric. This was the Allies' logistical rear base during Operation Overlord.
So Portsmouth, where we are now, for example, has a naval base, a dockyard, and that was very important. But Southampton, which is another city that's quite nearby, the place where the Titanic had sailed from early in the 20th century, for example, Southampton had really extensive docks, and that was very important for moving supplies over.
Somebody said that there were so many ships between Portsmouth and Southampton that you could actually walk on the decks between Portsmouth and Southampton. There were so many ships there waiting for this invasion.
All the neighboring train stations were requisitioned to supply the ports from where the tons of railway equipment needed to liberate France would set out.
But the big ports are really important, and not least because they had the infrastructure often with the railways coming down near to the quayside, so that made it easy to bring supplies from depots that could be miles inland down to the port right next to the ships to load them onto the ship quickly. It was all about moving supplies and troops over to Normandy as quickly as possible. And those depots inland they were all connected to railways as well.
To save time and cut down on maintenance, the locomotives and carriages that had only just been assembled a few days earlier were loaded directly onto the ferries, ready to go into action.
Pour la partie ferroviaire, on a conçu un système de transport intégré, c'est-à-dire dédié au chemin de fer. On a cette image de barge avec 60 hommes à bord. On va avoir la même chose pour des locomotives, à une échelle bien plus grosse. C'est-à-dire qu'on a des bateaux dédiés au transport de locomotives, on a des bateaux dédiés au transport de trains. Et pour ça, qu'on a dans le sud de l'Angleterre des villages qui vont se transformer en réserve de matériel avec des voies sur lesquelles on stocke à la queue leu-leu des wagons, d'autres voies où on stocke des locomotives pour que dans les jours qui suivent le débarquement, très rapidement, on embarque ces matériels à bord de bateaux spécifiques et on les met en exploitation en Europe.
The American Army convoys included boats which had been developed in New Jersey for commercial purposes in order to transport military trains that would be used in the Battle of Normandy. The Allies made use of 2 sea trains which left from the port of Southampton.
Et donc on a des ports anglais qui vont charger des trains complets, vraiment des wagons par dizaines à bord d'un seul bateau pour pouvoir les débarquer en France, à Cherbourg d'abord et dans d'autres ports, pour pouvoir les mettre tout de suite sur les rails et partir en exploitation. Et on a donc des bateaux affectés à ces usages-là. On a par exemple des bateaux ferry qui servaient soit à usage civil pour traverser entre 2 ports, et donc dans lesquels on a une voie qui se prolonge du quai vers le bateau. On embarque les locomotives, on embarque les wagons, et à l'autre bout, arrivé à destination, l'avant du bateau s'ouvre et on peut décharger ces trains qui repartent directement sur les voies.
Right up until the end of the war in May 1945, American trains set out across the Channel to guarantee a continuous supply of troops, food, and ammunition.
Operation Overlord was not just June the 6th, and of course, it was the start of nearly a year's fighting. And lots more people came over in the days after D-Day than on D-Day itself. And one of the things was learned that certainly at the time, without the support of railways, you could not make sufficient progress.
Without the trains, nothing would have happened because the only way that you could move things was on the railway. In short, really, the railways were crucial, absolutely crucial to the success of Operation Overlord, to the success of the operation of the war. And without the railways, as Churchill said, we couldn't have won the war. Without the railways, winning the war was impossible.
From the very outset of Operation Overlord, trains were at the heart of the Allied military strategy. Thanks to the strength of American industry and the support of the British, the Allies were able to transport an unprecedented railway arsenal to within several kilometers of the French coast. The next step was to land on the Normandy beaches and write a new page of history, that of the liberation of France.